guys, how are ya? My name is Shelby, as you guys know, and this is my senior presentation. Before we get started, I want to say I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody had a great Easter with their families, and I hope everybody's staying safe during everything that's happening right now. Um, but yeah, my presentation is going to be on victims advocacy for domestic violence and rape victims. I just want to put in a disclaimer that some of the information that is shared might be sensitive to some people. I don't know what goes on in you guys' lives or what's happened in you guys' lives, but I just wanted to put out the disclaimer that this information is sensitive and it can be a difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is victims advocacy. A victims advocate is a person who supports and accompanies a victim as they go through their journey through whatever they have gone through. People can have a victims advocate for any type of crime or any type of event that happens to them that leaves trauma. A victim's advocate is the link between the person and the law. And this helps a lot of people because they don't know what steps to take or how to proceed if they do choose to proceed legally. There are different types of victims advocates. An internal advocate works closer with prosecutors' offices, and this is for people who are trying to build a case against somebody else. And an institutional advocate is somebody who is working to promote policy changes. So when doing that, it's allowing more options for anybody, any type of circumstance. There needs to be more options for these people. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be talking solely about domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and rape. So, yes. With victims advocacy, there are many options that they can provide you with, and one of those is the crisis hotline. A crisis hotline is typically associated with suicide, but they're available to talk about. There are different crisis hotlines about any given topic. They're ran by professionals and volunteers, and it is 24/7, so it helps people no matter what time of day, if it is a holiday, anything. And it gives immediate options for shelters in your area. There's a nationwide crisis hotline, and there's also a local crisis hotline. So wherever you are in the country, it's open for you. There are counselors present, but it's not the goal for counseling to be involved with the crisis hotline. It's more about support, and it's more ran by peers. But yes, one of the main points on the crisis hotline, it provides information about shelters, and a domestic violence shelter are very important to have because domestic violence is the leading cause of homelessness in the United States. And these shelters are a safe place for women and children to temporarily stay while they get their options in order or in case they need medical assistance. These are a great idea in theory, but in reality, most shelters have a wait list of 6 months. But these women aren't allowed to stay past a year. So they get all of their ducks in a row. They can get all of their options and what they plan to do onward, but they can't stay longer than a year. Without all of this housing, many of these people are likely to return to their abuser, lose custody of their children, and possibly die. And when talking about domestic violence, it's very easy to get caught up in she, her pronouns, and that's not the case. Sorry, my phone's next to me. But that's not the case at all. Domestic violence occurs in men, women, children. It does not have to be just women. But what these shelters are very important for, it gives victims more hope for the future. It allows them to push forward what they're choosing to do. So next I'm going to give you guys some very chilling statistics. 3 out of 10 women and 1 out of 10 men have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking. 24 people per minute are victims of these violent acts by an intimate partner, and 12 million women are subjected to abuse over the course of a year. That number kind of just gives you a chill going down your spine. But in 2015, 1,670 children died as a result of abuse and neglect. That number is terrible because a child never asked to be brought into any of this. They never asked to be a part of mommy and daddy's fighting. 4 out of 5 children who are abused from their parents, and 90% of them are abused from another family member. That is terrible for me to even think about. These numbers continue to increase annually without the help of the advocacy programs and child protective services and social services. While we learned that child protective services does the best they can, there are very overworked and understaffed, and it's very difficult for these people to make it to every single kid. In reality, you can't make it to every kid. In this statistic, in 2015, 311,000 children were helped by child protective services, which that sounds great. It sounds awesome. But there's 700,000 children who are annually abused. So child protective services isn't even scraping half. And we talked about child protective services and social work, that it happens, one major myth is that it happens with lower income family and a certain demographic. That is not true at all. Domestic violence can occur in every single race, every single gender. That doesn't make sense. Moving every single race, ethnicity, it doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, it can happen anywhere. Now I'm going to talk about some of the signs of concealment of abuse. Typically, a lot of people don't want to talk about their abuse, which is very understandable. I feel like they're ashamed of it and that they don't want anybody else to be a part of it. And this usually leads, like the longer and longer that this builds up, it usually leads for an intervention to be taken place. And in intervention, it's usually typically denoted as poorly to these women and men. They're actions taken by an outside agent that is meant to change the life situation of an individual. This can be a doctor, this can be a friend, this can be the courts, this can be a victim's advocate, like an actual victim's advocate. But a lot of people don't seek out the help. Many people blame themselves for the abuse because they chose to be with this person, and they feel like a string of their choices made them get abused, and that's not the case. And right now I'm focusing on domestic violence, but we're going to talk about a little bit with rape victims. They didn't do anything either. It's not about what you wear. It's not about where you are. Just because you're going to a bar with your friends does not mean you're asking for anything. So just kind of putting that one in there. And all of this is important for empowerment. Empowerment is giving the choice back to the victim. And that is the sole role for victims advocate. You are giving the power back to the victim. You are giving them the resources to gain their confidence back. So I feel like that's very important for all of us going into psychology because you don't know what you're going to see. If you're going to be a therapist, you have no idea what you're going to see in the future. So sometimes advocacy backfires and it's not good. It's horrible. But sometimes it does happen. If advocacy backfires, it does get worse before it can get better. It's based on the ground that the empowering person, words are very hard today, that the empowering person that is subjected to abuse. When they feel unempowered, the options and techniques tend to fail. They don't work to their full effect, and when they're not empowered, they feel like they can't do this. They have to return back to their abuser. And that is, some people need to do it that way, but it's not the ideal situation for most people. But one of the main focuses as a victim's advocate, you do not want to involve law enforcement until the victim is ready to, because that can hurt more than they can help, because you have to gain the respect and as well as the trust, because this person is laying out everything that they've been through in the past year, 6 months, 3 years, maybe even longer. Many people in their lives probably don't even know about it, but they chose to tell you about it because of one situation. But if you lose their trust, you're not going to gain it back. And involving the police is the easiest way to lose their trust. It can make the victims angry and more likely to return to their abuser because they're thinking you're no better than them. I can't trust them. I can't trust you, so I might as well go back to a place where I have a bed at least. Most victims who say that they're going to do something don't follow through with their decisions. It's a very wishy-washy cycle, and I'm trying to say this in the best way that I can. It is difficult for these men and women. I understand that this is probably one of the most difficult things that they can go through, and there are a lot of different factors involved, and many people have to do a cost analysis. They have to choose their own safety, their financial stability, and the welfare of their children, because a lot of times children are involved, and many of these people who, if they leave their abuser, they can't make it on their own. They have to move back in with parents, or they have to live in a shelter. There's so many different situations that can happen. So this one statistic I found, 12.3 people fail to cooperate with police intervention. So if the police are involved, many people are trying to save their abuser, and they don't want them to get hurt. 73% do not cooperate with the formal complaint, and 28% of people drop police calls immediately. This is really bringing out the point that they want the situation to be de-escalated rather than charges being pressed. Okay, now I'm going to be talking more on children's advocacy centers. These centers are multidisciplinary organizations that investigate child abuse. Child abuse can mean many different things. They can be neglect, they can be starvation, they can be assault, they can be sexual abuse. While at these children's advocacy centers, children are subjected to medical attention and forensic examinations. And forensic examinations are very important if the family chooses to proceed legally in a rape case. This exam, if they want any of the evidence from the event to be in the case, it needs to happen within 72 hours of the assault in order to preserve any evidence, because there could be different types of evidence. If there could be a hair somewhere on the body, there can be DNA underneath your fingernails. Many people really forget that that is a clear form of DNA by just scratching somebody's skin. You get their DNA underneath your nails, and that has been proven to solve many cases. And then the obvious, if there is any DNA through semen. Children in these centers are more likely to get examinations than those not going to the centers. And these centers are all over the country. 48% of children in children's advocacy centers receive an exam if there's suspicion of penetration. That is insane amount of people. 21% of children receive exams if they're just in the community. So there is a very big decrease. Some of the response factors on if the child does get an exam is age of the child, suspected penetration, injury, and the gender. And it's terrible, but the demographic of children that are most likely to get an exam the same day is a Caucasian girl, which, I mean, it's very sad, but that's words are very hard today. The statistics show that they couldn't hide it from their families any longer, and a lot of the Caucasian girls are more likely to get an exam that day rather than an African American boy, which is terrible. I think that, if my personal opinion, if there's any suspicion of penetration or any injury on that child's body, that they need to be subjected to a medical exam immediately. But that's just my opinion. The goals of these children's advocacy centers are providing psychotherapeutic interventions, victims advocacy, and case reviews and tracking. This is important for the parents because, due to the fact that these are minors, they would need their parents' help into making a case for themselves. So the victims advocacy, the children's advocacy centers really help with the parents, and they make the information easy enough for a child can understand what is going on. They want the children to understand what's going on and to allow them to have the empowerment factor. The locations of these places are sometimes privately owned, in hospitals, ran by attorneys' offices, child protective services, or human services. You can find these places everywhere. A lot of hospitals that I know about have their own protocol that they have to do. If a child comes into the hospital with signs of sexual abuse, they have to call the police, and they have to call child protective services, which that is their protocol. It's still growing. It's still growing, but it's much better than it has been in the previous years because there hasn't been the center for these people. It's a safe haven for children and families that need more information on how to proceed and how they can proceed, while also giving therapeutic measures for the people that have been abused. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about Jenna and Aaron's Law. In May of 2009, Jenna Quinn, who was a sexual assault survivor from Texas, proposed to the United States Senate that teachings should be put in place about sexual assault. And I completely agree with this. There are so many children who do not understand what is going on and how this affects them directly. And this was the first prevention education law that helps teachers, parents, and students understand the warning signs of sexual assault and understand what has happened to them. This really set the precedent for Aaron's Law coming up. And as of 2019, Aaron's Law was passed in 37 out of the 50 states to provide public education information about sexual assault in public schools. I love what these programs stand for and they are both partnered up with the FBI and Crimes Against Children unit. They're anybody who comes through the organization is immediately put through to the FBI, which I love that. And it's very important for children to understand that there are warning signs of sexual abuse, and that parents need to know this. Teachers need to understand what even the after signs of abuse for a child, because usually the teacher is the first one to see anything, because typically teachers see your kids more than you do, and they get to build a relationship with these kids, and they see things that you don't want to see as a parent, and that is why this program is so important. It allows them to look out for these kids. So now I'm going to talk about the psychological effects of abuse. Many people process abuse in different ways. They process trauma in different ways. But I did find a study done in Hawaii in 2007. It is with 100 domestic violence and rape victims as well as their mothers, because and this study showed that 75% of these people had post-traumatic stress disorder. And it also showed that the children are more likely to become dissociative in their teenage years. They don't want to talk about what happened to them because they were made to keep quiet for so long about what was really going on. They become disassociative. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want to be involved with anything. They don't want to do anything. It also has links with prolonged anxiety, depression, and possible suicide tendencies. This is the reality, but it's terrible facts that the abuse does this to young kids who have their lives ahead of them. Many people, like I said prior, many people keep it buried deep, and that instead of talking to someone because it shows shame, embarrassment, but that's not the case at all. Like, you need to get your help. But based on that note, you do need to get your help. Victims advocacy is very important to have, and it's still growing every day, and there are new resources coming to life every day. But if you or anybody that you know is a victim to domestic violence or sexual assault, I can put the hotline or the crisis hotline number in the link of this video, and so that you guys have it. You need to utilize the resources and take care of yourself. I just hope everybody is staying safe and being careful, and I will not see you guys next year, but yeah, you know. All right, bye.